The most devoted fan bases in the history of pop culture are not just built around characters. They are not just built around storylines, worlds, or lore. They are built around the fantasy of being evaluated, and then being found worthy. Think about what that actually means. People are not just watching these organizations. They are imagining themselves being assessed by them, measured, tested, considered, and then, if they have what it takes, being chosen. At some point, you sorted yourself into a fictional group. Maybe it was a Hogwarts house. Maybe it was a zodiac sign, a great house in Westeros, a cabin at Camp Half-Blood. Maybe you retook the quiz until the result matched how you actually see yourself, and nobody has talked about what is really happening underneath all of that. You were not just picking a favorite. You were looking for something outside yourself to confirm something you already believed about yourself on the inside. But there's a specific category in fiction that takes that instinct somewhere else entirely. These are not the groups you choose. They are the groups that choose you. And the people who feel something when they imagine that moment, those people are not just fans of good fiction. They are answering a question they have been carrying for longer than they realize. Am I enough to be chosen? Good evening. Coming to you from my library, where tonight, the case file is about the part of you that longs to be special. The Green Lantern ring does not choose the strongest person in the sector. It does not choose the most experienced, decorated, or the most obvious candidate. It chooses the person who can overcome fear. And that distinction is the entire reason this organization produces the devotion it does. But here is the part that most coverage of this franchise never actually examines. Every major Green Lantern in the history of the Corps was selected for something the world around them had already decided was the problem. Hal Jordan was reckless. His superiors considered his disregard for his own safety a liability rather than an asset. He was eventually discharged from the Air Force for it. John Stewart was insubordinate, a man whose habit of questioning authority for all the right reasons made him a difficult soldier and an extraordinary lantern. Kyle Rayner was not chosen for any particular quality at all. He was chosen by circumstance, the last person available when the last guardian needed someone to carry the last ring. What he lacked in conventional worthiness, he made up for in his imagination and emotional range. The ring didn't select him for being ready, it selected him because there was nobody else. And what he did with that accident of circumstance became the argument for why he deserved it. Guy Gardner's aggression, Simon Baz's desperation, and Jessica Cruz, who spent 4 years locked in her own apartment, consumed by anxiety so severe she couldn't leave the building. An evil ring found her first, one that fed on fear rather than overcoming it. She fought it until a Green Lantern Corps ring replaced it, because the person who had been swallowed by fear and clawed back out is exactly who the Corps was built for. The ring did not change any of these people. It reframed them. Everything the world called a flaw, the ring called a qualification. Everything that made them difficult, unreliable, or too much, the ring looked at that and said, yes, that is exactly what we need. This is why the Green Lantern fantasy produces the specific emotional response it does in the specific people it reaches. The audience drawn to this organization is not drawn to power. They are drawn to the reframing. They are people who have spent years being told that their most essential qualities are problems. They are people who need to see a universe-level authority look at those same qualities and call them worthy. Psychologists have a term for what the ring is actually selecting: post-traumatic growth, the documented phenomenon where the qualities developed to survive hardship become a person's most extraordinary capabilities. The stubbornness that got you through the thing that should have broken you is the same stubbornness the ring is measuring. The sensitivity that made everything harder is the same sensitivity that generates the most sophisticated constructs. The intensity that made you difficult to be around is the same intensity that makes the ring bearer's will stable enough to stop a planet. The ring doesn't find people who are ready. It finds people who have already been through something, and it discovers that what they went through produced exactly what the Corps needed all along.
Wait. If the ring is looking for courage, willpower, imagination, and all that nonsense, why don't it just pick somebody obvious? Superman got courage, Batman got willpower, Wonder Woman got discipline, even Flash got heart. So why is the universe handing out magic space jewelry to reckless pilots and anxious losers?
Because the ring is not looking for a finished hero. It is looking for the raw material of one. Most people do not feel complete. They feel misread, too anxious, too intense, too stubborn, too emotional, too difficult. Green Lantern gives the audience a fantasy where the thing the world called a flaw was never really a flaw. It was potential waiting for the right context. In real life, no ring descends from space to explain your pain or prove you were worthy all along. But everyone has some part of themselves they hope was misunderstood. And Green Lantern asks the question that makes the fantasy work. What if the part of you the world rejected was the same part the universe would have chosen? The Demon Slayer Corps exists for one reason: to kill Muzan, the demon who created every other demon. Kill him, and every demon he has ever made dies with him. The war ends and the Corps disbands. There is a finish line, and every member of the Corps can see it even though they cannot reach it in their lifetime. The final selection exam places candidates on a mountain full of demons for days with no assistance. Most candidates die. The ones who survive are not just the strongest. They are the ones whose combination of skill, will, and refusal to be killed was sufficient for the task. The Corps doesn't test worthiness through an interview or a ranking. The mountain reveals it. You come back down or you don't. And here is why this specific organization produces the love it does from the audience. In a world where every major problem feels permanent, systemic, and too large for any one person to personally affect, where the fights that matter most have no visible finish line, the fantasy of joining an organization fighting toward one specific, achievable, defined victory is almost unbearably appealing. You cannot solve systemic inequality alone. You cannot personally end an economic collapse, but you can kill one specific demon. You can contribute to the mission that has one conclusion. The Demon Slayer Corps gives its members something most people never get in real life: a problem they can actually solve. The people drawn to the Demon Slayer Corps are not people who love violence. They are people exhausted by fighting things that never end.
Now you're hooking me in, Winston. Me understand that very well. Back in Tortuga, me once ran with a crew of ragtag scallywags and swashbucklers. The movies make piracy look glamorous. But really, it was like managing a rundown comic shop staffed by chimpanzees with scurvy. You patch one hole in the ship, 6 more open. You stop one mutiny, somebody else steals the rum. You finally reach shore, and by then, you don't even know how the blasted ship stayed afloat. There were days, Winston, when me wished Neptune would just drag us under and be done with it. Hours me would sit there, not blinking, lost in me own thoughts.
All right, save it for therapy. That is the appeal, not the violence, the ending. The Demon Slayer Corps gives suffering a shape. It says the nightmare has a source. The war has a target. The fight can actually be finished. And for people living in a world where most problems feel permanent, that fantasy is almost unbearable. Because the dream is not fighting forever. The dream is that one day, you finally do not have to.
And you look badass with a sword!
The Jedi Order does not recruit. It recognizes. The Force selects. The Jedi merely identify the selection and formalize it. Children are brought to the temple young enough that the Order's framework becomes the only identity they have ever known. You did not join the Jedi Order. You are identified as already belonging to it. And what the Order asks in return is total. No attachments, no personal property, no romantic love, no family bonds that compete with the bond to the Force. Not because the Jedi are cruel, but because the Order understands that divided loyalty is the beginning of the fall. The Jedi framework is built on a specific philosophical promise that belonging to something infinite makes the finite self irrelevant, and that the loss of the finite self is not a sacrifice, it is a relief.
Yes. Fear is the path to the dark side. Fear leads to anger. Anger leads to hate. Hate leads to suffering.
That is the psychological core of why people are drawn to this fantasy. Not just the lightsaber or the force powers, the exhaustion of being a self, the constant maintenance of identity, desire, attachment, personal history. All of it requires energy that never gets replenished. The Jedi promise is that there exists a belonging so complete that the exhausting work of being a person becomes unnecessary. You dissolve into something larger, and the dissolution puts you at peace, not loss. The people drawn to the Jedi fantasy are not people who want power. They are people who are tired of carrying themselves. The Jedi Order offers the one thing no other organization on this list offers: permission to put it down.
You know what, Winston? The Jedi Order actually sound pretty good. No rent, no light bill, no money, no job applications, no credit score, free healthcare, food covered, shelter covered, clothes covered, purpose covered. All you gotta do is swing the glow stick, take an meditate, and not catch feelings. Well, actually, that last part might be tough with Shark T on the council.
The Jedi Order selected the most force-sensitive being in history, spent a decade suppressing every quality that made him extraordinary, and fell, not to an external enemy, but to the person it was most certain it had chosen correctly. The Order that promised to dissolve the self instead amplified everything it was trying to eliminate, and the galaxy burned because of it. Before the Jedi Order, before the Green Lantern Ring, before any of this existed, there was a round table. But before we get there, you need to understand what life actually looked like for the people who first fell in love with that story. Because it was not pretty. Medieval Europe was a world where the life you were born into was the life you died in. Full stop. If your father was a farmer, you were a farmer. If your mother scrubbed floors, that was your future too. There was no climbing. There was no reinvention. There was no version of the story where the circumstances of your birth were something you can outwork or outthink your way past. For most people alive in that world, the idea that who you were on the inside could change what your life looked like on the outside, that was not an option. That was a fantasy. And then someone told them about the knights. Not because knights were powerful. The nobility had power and nobody was writing songs about them. Not because knights were rich. Plenty of lords had money, and the peasants felt nothing for it. Knights captured the imagination of the medieval world for one reason. They were the only people in the entire society who were defined by what they were, rather than where they came from. Knighthood was not inherited, it was earned. It required courage, loyalty, skill, and a specific quality of character that theoretically had nothing to do with your last name or your father's profession. A blacksmith's son could become a knight. In a world where almost nothing else could be changed, that one possibility was almost too much to process. And then King Arthur did something nobody else had done. He built a table with no head, no seat more important than any other, no hierarchy based on the family or title or land, just a standard, just a question of whether you were worthy enough to sit there. The people heard those stories, farmers, craftsmen, laborers living lives of total invisibility, and they felt something when they heard about the table that their actual lives had never once given them. The feeling that somewhere a standard existed that might look at who they were and decided they were enough. And here's what nobody says out loud about that feeling. It never goes away.
Ooh, so that is the fantasy. Not just being worthy, being pulled out of the crowd. Everybody wants to believe there is some elite room somewhere where the real ones sit. And one day, the universe checks the list and says, let him in.
That is correct. Every generation since the days of old has built a new version of the Knights of the Round Table. Different armor, weapons, and language. But the person watching the Green Lantern Ring fly past the strongest warrior in the sector and land on the overlooked test pilot, they are feeling exactly what the medieval farmer felt hearing about Camelot for the first time around the fire. They need to be assessed by something greater than your circumstances and found worthy. Psychologists have spent decades studying this specific drive, and the finding is remarkably consistent across every culture ever examined. Human beings do not just want to succeed, they want to be recognized, not for what they produce, not for what they own, for what they fundamentally are. The need to matter, to have something look at your character specifically and say, yes, that is the one, sits so deep in human psychology that it shows up in every civilization that has ever told stories. The medieval peasant did not dream about being rich, he dreamed about being chosen, and so do we. These organizations mentioned are not beloved because they are powerful, or well written, or visually impressive. They are beloved because they each answer the same question in a different way. The Green Lantern Corps says, the quality the world called a flaw was the one thing we were looking for all along. The Demon Slayer Corps says, the fight you are willing to give everything is a fight that can actually be won. The Jedi Order says, there is a belonging large enough that the exhausting work of being yourself becomes unnecessary. All different answers, but the same question underneath, am I enough to be chosen? And the person watching this, who already knows which one would have chosen them, they are not just a fan of the franchise. They are a person who needed to hear that yes. But these are just my observations. If this case file earned your attention, feel free to leave a like, consider subscribing, and tell me what you observed in the comments below. We'd also like to announce that the Eves Manor Discord is now open to guests. The channel is still small, and so is the community, but that is exactly why we wanted to start it now. If you are interested in being part of a smaller community, a place where you can be acknowledged rather than drowned out by a sea of others, where you can suggest future case files and help shape what the library becomes next, the Discord link is in the description. And until we meet again, my library will remain open.